Well, some wordplay in the title of a scathing opinion piece. Minnesota is becoming the land of 10,000 frauds. A play on, the land of lakes. Jason Chaffetz is coming up in focus. First, let's go to Garrett Tenney with more on this developing story. Garrett.
Yeah, Harris, we are already seeing ICE ramping up its efforts in the Twin Cities, with federal agents focusing on Somali individuals who are in the country illegally. But the Trump administration is also looking at ending temporary protected status, TPS, for a long list of countries, including Somalia, that's allowed folks to live and work in the U.S. These moves come after those massive fraud schemes in Minnesota, where dozens of folks, almost exclusively from the Somali community, stole more than $1 billion taxpayer dollars by fraudulently billing several state social service programs. At yesterday's cabinet meeting, President Trump said he wants Somalis to leave.
I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country.
Minnesota is home to the largest group of Somali refugees in the world, close to 80,000 people. Most of them have become U.S. citizens, according to the Census Bureau. And over the past few decades, they have become a political power block in the state, especially for Democrats. So yesterday, local officials lined up to blast the president over his latest comments.
To, again, villainize an entire group is ridiculous under any circumstances. And the way that Donald Trump is consistently doing it, I think, calls into question major constitutional violations. And it certainly violates the moral fabric of what we stand by in this country as Americans.
So far, more than 50 people have been convicted in that massive fraud scheme. 78 others are charged, and we are told that this investigation very much ongoing, and that what we've seen so far could be just the tip of the iceberg. Harris?
All right, Matt, great reporting. Thank you for getting us started. Fox News contributor Liz Peek has written a new opinion piece. Quote, why didn't the Minnesota authorities crack down sooner on the blatant theft? Reportedly, they were afraid of offending the Somali community, which constitutes a solid voting bloc for Walz and his Democrat colleagues. One local politician put it this way: if you don't win the Somali community, you can't win Minneapolis. And if you don't win Minneapolis, you cannot win the state. End of story. All of that a quote. Minnesota Democrats driving that point home.
Obviously, everyone knows that our president is racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, and we are going to fight that. America has a history of fighting and stopping those kind of individuals who continue to divide people and divide communities.
Jason Chaffetz now, a Fox News contributor and former Republican congressman of Utah. First of all, let's talk about the fraud allegations. And having lived in Minnesota, and both in Minneapolis and St. Paul and there, the Twin Cities, let's talk about that community. But first, the fraud, your reaction.
That's a lot of money. You can't just go hide $1 billion. Like, these people have, they've earned it. And Donald Trump is right. That last person to make the comment about dividing communities and all that, you know what? President Trump is pro-America. It is anti-American to actually rip off the American taxpayers. We're the most generous country on the face of the planet. Minnesotans that I know even have relatives who live there. They're very generous. But there's nothing like coming in, ripping off your community, stealing it from the people who actually do need these goods. And Liz Peek wrote a great column. She talked about they had budgeted like $2 million for certain reimbursements, but now that number's over $120 million. And it ends up that, hey, it happens to be these Somalians that are accused of ripping off the system and then sending it to a terrorist organization to go kill people overseas.
Wow. Just real quickly, because I covered some of these cases when I lived there. Minnesota for years, certainly after 2007, 2010, with a growing population from East Africa, particularly Somalia, Minnesota struggled for years to stem the recruiting of some young Somali men by the Islamic State group and the Somali-based militant group al-Shabaab. Now, we knew that that was happening. We had more than a dozen of those young men indicted and caught up in a trial and all of that. not many years ago. And then just this past September, they had another case, a 23-year-old defendant who pleaded guilty of providing material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Look, Minnesota has a problem. The president is targeting them because they apparently, at least some in their community, uncalled, don't really want to assimilate.
Look, if you're here legally and lawfully and you're not committing crimes, you got nothing to worry about. But if you're here illegally and you are committing crimes and you are supporting a terrorist organization, these terrorists, the al-Shabaab, their ties to al-Qaeda, and what they've been doing to kill people around the world in Kenya and other countries. You look at the pirating that's going off the coast of Africa there, it's unbelievable how bad they've been. And they were designated a foreign terrorist organization back in 2008. And so if you have the funding that's happening by ripping off the people in Minnesota and the American people and their taxpayer dollars, I applaud. I want Secretary Noem, I want the President of the United States to go in there, root it out. ICE is going to do the difficult thing, but you know what? You're here illegally, you got to go home. You've got to be detained, you have to be deported, all of them. You're here illegally, you're all gone.
So why would a Minnesota governor get involved in this? What are the politics? Let's dig into that. A new opinion piece now has this headline: voters were right to reject Tim Walz in 2024. And here's part of it, quote, Walz is wildly incompetent as both a politician, as a governing executive as well. He is a hypocrite who gives lectures on morality one moment and cheers the possible death of his political opponents the next. In all, Walz is one of the worst people in our politics, someone who would run both the government and our political culture further into the ground, end quote. Your reaction?
When I was in Congress, in the House gym, his locker was right next to mine. Nice guy, but he's an idiot. And he's had his chance. And you know what? He's absolutely blown it. He's shown that his political colors are all about protecting his backside rather than doing what's right for America, right for Minnesota, and doing what he's supposed to be doing. He is so wrong. Between him and the Attorney General, who doesn't get enough credit for being an idiot as well, Keith Ellison, who served with us in the United States House of Representatives, they are a 1-2 punch there in Minnesota that is destroying that state. And Donald Trump's going to help save that state. And I think the majority of Minnesotans are going to applaud him for cleaning up this fraudulent mess that they've created.
Yeah, look, if anybody wants to do their homework on what they're dealing with, and I say the word some, not all, within the Somali community that are being looked at now, especially those here illegally, they can go to PBS, because that's the report I was quoting from. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's fact. All right. Let's do this. A survey by the right-leaning Media Research Center shows that over the past week, broadcast network Nightly News almost completely ignored this massive fraud story. ABC and CBS didn't cover it at all, not even a second. NBC spent less than 60 seconds on it. Now, I know you're not shocked by this, but I thought Democrats cared about COVID money and helping people out. Like, you would think that the mass part of this fraud, they would care about.
That's the part of the story that I don't understand from the media and from the Democrats. They believe, you hear Zohran Mamdani and others talk about, hey, we need more government, more resources, because there's no problem in your life, small or big, that government can't solve. But when you steal the money from government, guess what? The recipients of those who actually need it, they're the ones that are harmed the most. And that's part of the story they never, ever tell, because they want to perpetuate this myth that big government, more government, is infallible, and that we need more money, that the cupboards are bare. I would always hear Nancy Pelosi say, the cupboards are bare, we have to spend more. We're spending $4 trillion plus, and they still can't get it done, and then to have it ripped off by $1 billion. That's a massive amount of money, Harris.
Jason Chaffetz, great to start off the show with you in focus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here is the Minnesota fraud scandal as we understand it right now. A lot of companies and organizations were tapping into this, like Feeding Our Future, the Department of Human Services in Minnesota, Smart Therapy Center, whatever that is. There are more, just 3 that we wanted to point out here. Here's how they did it. Deceptive enrollment and Medicare programs. This is how it works. Fake meal counts, which means fake number of people, fake records and invoices, fraudulent autism diagnosis. That's how they work this system now. How much they stole, we believe at the moment it's more than $1 billion. Maybe that number goes higher. Tom Emmer's with me now, congressman from Minnesota, who's been quite critical so far. And, sir, thank you for your time. I heard you on the air in an interview the other day. I want you to listen to your governor, Tim Walz, respond to the allegation. He says it's no coincidence that the buzzards are circling in his state. Watch here.
My message is simple on this. You commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to prison. I don't care what color you are, what religion you are. Anybody who wants to help us in that, we welcome that. But sitting on the sidelines and throwing out accusations, and let's be very clear, demonizing an entire population and lying to people about the safety and security of this state is beneath that.
That was his comment yesterday. What's your comment today, sir?
Well, calling out a criminal activity bill is not racist, and it's not unfair. Look, this guy is pathetic. He is incompetent. He's a pathological, sociopathic liar. He lies about everything. Got caught on national TV, Bill, lying about something as dumb as when he was at Tiananmen Square. And his response to that back then was, you know, I grew up in a small town. Sometimes I'm a bit of a knucklehead. Look, my hat is off to President Donald J. Trump. We have been trying to sound the alarm on this fraud that has been going on since the beginning of the Walz administration for more than 3 years. And it wasn't until Donald Trump sent his truth out a couple weeks ago that everybody started paying attention. You have correctly pointed out, it's already more than $1 billion that these fraudsters stole from Minnesota taxpayers under Tim Walz's watch, and the number is growing. It's not just the $250 million fraud case, the largest pandemic fraud case in the country that's feeding our future. It's Medicaid housing fraud. You go back, it's autism centers, the list goes on and on, daycare fraud. But let's just look at the housing one. The Medicaid housing program was created back in 2020. They estimated it was going to cost annually about $2 million. You know what? From 2020 to 2024, it was $100 million. And they shut the program down in October of 2025 because from the beginning of the year, they'd already sucked out $61 million. And this idea that it's not going to al-Shabaab, they're sending the money back to Somalia, Bill. Yeah. People should understand, al-Shabaab controls the financial infrastructure in Somalia. It is going back to Somalia where al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization, is in charge.
Okay, so at the moment, I just want to read this from a federal prosecutor. His name is Joe Thompson. I don't know if you know him or not.
I do.
All right, so he made this comment at the end of July, all right? This fraud crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of widespread failure across nearly every level of leadership in Minnesota. Politicians who turned a blind eye, agencies that failed to act, prosecutors and law enforcement who didn't push hard enough. This isn't just a few criminals exploiting the system. This is a system that's been begging to be exploited. Sir.
Amen. Joe Thompson also said the level of fraud that he has found in just his investigation is, it takes your breath away. Here's the big issue. What I want to know as a Minnesotan, you've got $1 billion that went out under the Walz administration. By the way, he went on national TV saying, I take responsibility for prosecuting fraudsters. Tim Walz has done nothing. Tim Walz has not held one person in his administration accountable for $1 billion of fraud. And my question now is, this isn't just negligent incompetence, Bill. Somebody is complicit in this. And if the governor, there are whistleblowers, alleged whistleblowers out there that are claiming that they let the governor know and that he not only ignored them, he actually retaliated against them. If that's true, Bill, there probably should be an investigation into criminal charges. This governor, the attorney general, it stinks to high heaven.
He just thinks the government's picking on him, but we'll see where it goes. $1 billion sounds like it's a lot more than just picking. Sir, thank you for coming on. It is your home state in the spotlight, and we'll find.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he's open to the Treasury Department's investigation after millions of taxpayer dollars reportedly made its way to a terrorist group in Somalia.
When the President of the United States sets up and tweets 150 times after midnight and targets certain people, it's not a coincidence that they're targeting Minnesota. If they want to help us, I welcome that. I think they do an investigation, find out, but I don't think anybody in here really believes their motive and their timing is about actually doing something about this.
The failed VP candidate is questioning the Trump administration's movements, but members of Congress say this is all about protecting Americans and their money. The House Oversight Committee, which is also investigating, says Walz was warned about massive fraud in a pandemic food aid program for children, yet failed to act. So far, at least 50 people have been convicted in the massive fraud scheme, with nearly 80 others getting charged. Minneapolis leadership claims this is a massive case of government overreach.
Targeting Somali people means that due process will be violated. Mistakes will be made. We need to also be demanding better from an administration who is intent on targeting people and committing so much time, energy, and money to terrorizing certain groups within our community. That's not American.
If there is anything that is, a violation of someone's human rights or civil rights, excessive force or anything like that, they absolutely have a duty to intervene as police officers.
What are they talking about? I mean, that first speaker was Jacob Frey, the mayor. And let me just quote the New York Times. Let's clear this up. This is not some right-wing investigative story targeting Tim Walz. No, New York Times says it's staggering in its scale and brazenness. This story, it's been happening for 5 years, and they wasted up to $1 billion, this is New York Times, in taxpayer money. That is more than Minnesota spends annually to run its Department of Corrections. That's the New York Times. Tell that to Jacob Frey.
Look, they're lying to you. In short, since 2019, primarily when Tim Walz became governor, to now, Minnesota's government has become a pseudo-criminal run enterprise. Another set of numbers that matter: from 2019 to 2023, Minnesota's SNAP payments, $509 million in 2019, 174% rise from 2019 to 20. 2019 to 20, and $1.5 billion plus in 2023. What happened in Minnesota that required that much of an increase in outbound SNAP money alone from that program? The fact is, they didn't choose to ignore. They simply closed their eyes to the waste, the fraud. A restaurant owner should not be stealing $250,000 in COVID funds, in one example, millions of dollars. Now we have the outbound money going to al-Shabaab, going through the NGOs, going through these. When you're stealing money from children, Tim Walz, which is what your administration let happen, and it's going overseas to terrorists, don't blame Donald Trump.
Yep. There's something I'm quite confused about. 2022 is when Merrick Garland started charging in this case. 2022. That's a lot of years ago. But yet the media somehow didn't discover the story. And then we find, I'm going to answer my own question. Let's look at this. Now that this has been covered by the New York Times, 0 minutes of coverage on ABC, 0 minutes CBS, less than 1 minute NBC. Harris, this has been going on since 2022. Where is the investigative
So I worked for
journalism?
ABC News for years in the Twin Cities, and the start of that was really the start of when we would see East African nations like Somalia coming over. And they had very good social programs in Minnesota. And so that was a magnet for them. And they came, and many were beautiful families. But what came with them were all of those connections that the Islamic State had, both outside our country and tied to some of those East African nations, and inside with al-Shabaab, that militant group that's on our soil. So you saw a lot of recruitment, and Minnesota had a problem with this, and they knew that they did. 2007, 2010, they knew that it was growing. They didn't cull it. They didn't. And so as it began to grow, those young, mostly men, were picked up, at least a dozen of them that we know of, maybe more. And those trials began by ISIS. It became a problem there. So if they were willing to ignore the veins of radicalization and terrorism in the state of Minnesota, why should we be surprised that they would ignore $1 billion+
You know what else they ignored, Harris? The Somali gangs. So it's not just about al-Shabaab. The Somali gangs in Minnesota that prey on their very own community that Ilhan Omar ignores. I have police officer sources there that have been telling me this for years.
They're a voting base.
You know, Kaylee, and I remember, because I was at the White House during this time, during COVID, And there were so many questions that came to me about the Paycheck Protection Program, which was there to support small businesses to keep American citizens on payroll. And there was so much criticism of that, just to keep people working, keep American citizens getting paid. All the while, the press was totally turning a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and the reason why a thorough investigation into this scandal is so important is because it's really a perfect case study of the many failures of progressive governance. You had mass migration without any assimilation at all. You had racialized politics that pressured people not to say anything about the lack of assimilation. And then you had bureaucratic mismanagement of taxpayer funds, and then the total drive of any real accountability from the people who mismanaged those funds in the first place. You don't see any sort of apology from Tim Walz. Hey, Minnesotans, I'm sorry for wasting $1 billion by letting the Somali community do this. That is a major scandal. And, you know, it's not just Minnesota. And I will just say really quickly, to your point that this had been known for years, there is a group of state employees in Minnesota who said that they flagged this for Kamala Harris's campaign in the DNC when she tapped Tim Walz. And they said nothing about it. And there's a reason why Brooke Rollins yesterday in the cabinet meeting said that she's going after other blue states who are refusing to turn over SNAP data. It is because this is not just a Minnesota problem. This is a California problem. This is a New York problem. Our taxpayer funds are being exploited and abused, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
And, you know, at the heart of each of those states, Cheryl, is I was shocked to read this in the New York Times. The episode has raised broader questions for some residents about the sustainability of Minnesota's Scandinavian-modeled system of robust safety net programs sustained by high taxes.
No.
Yeah. Bingo.
You want to bankrupt the city of Minneapolis? You know, go right ahead. But look, this is the tip of the iceberg, guys, on this investigation. I have a well-placed source that told me that the fraud is everywhere. It does point back to the Somali community, to be clear here, because of the al-Shabaab connections. But we're talking about Michigan. It's happening up in Canada. The same fraud schemes are going on in Canada. To your point about the Minnesota Department of Human Service employees, yes, they warned the Harris campaign, but they also warned Tim Walz specifically, and they were gaslit. They were ignored. They've been very vocal about it. And I don't know, thank you, the New York Times, for finally catching up to what everybody else already knows. But to your point about the politics, you know, Walz is running for governor again.
That's right.
So he has every reason to get in front of the cameras right now and decry all of this. Right. Because he needs the money. If you don't have the Somali community, as you know, Harris, if you don't have them behind you, you don't get elected.
You can't win in the Twin Cities. You can't win the state. And look, Senator Tom Emmer, Republican running up there, yeah, he's got plenty to say right now. So Walz had better speak up. Otherwise, he won't be in that race.
Oh, to be a Democrat, you can take taxpayer money intended for children, get it to terrorist groups unwittingly, and then have an aiding and abetting press corps. Like, wow, that's how this country works.
Yeah, like any iceberg, there's a whole lot below the surface. So let's bring in the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, for more on this. Mr. Chairman, good to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time today. I just want to put up on the screen here some facts and figures so folks at home can truly understand the depth of the fraud here. This was in the Minnesota Housing Stabilization Program. The predicted cost was $2.6 million annually. You can see the actual costs there eclipsed by at least 10 times, closing in on 50 times. First half of 2025, they spent $61 million on other examples of alleged fraud. Feeding Our Future program, $250 million. Autism treatment, $14 million. Medicaid, $18.5 million for services that were never provided. And allegations, Mr. Chairman, that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, either turned a blind eye to this or actually empowered people to do this through political correctness. What do you want to know?
Well, first of all, what you're going to see is the fraud entailed a whole menu of government programs, social programs, and that's kind of the mojo for the Democrat Party now. They want to put more and more money into social programs, but yet they refuse to accept responsibility for any type of waste, fraud, and abuse. What we know is the state employees in Minnesota rang the bell, they blew the whistle that there was massive fraud, and yet Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, apparently turned a blind eye to that for fear of political retaliation from the large voting bloc of Somalis.
Yeah, well, you just pointed that out, what the employees of the state were saying. This is from the Minnesota Department of Human Service employees. They posted this on X Saturday. They said, quote, Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. As staff, we firsthand witnessed and observed fraud happening, yet we were shut down, reassigned, and told to keep quiet, sometimes more. There are even allegations, Mr. Chairman, of retaliation against whistleblowers here.
Well, sure, what it sounds like. If you disregard someone and reassign them to another position, that's retaliation. And, you know, Democrats used to say they protected the state and federal employees who worked for the government. But what we found is anytime you blow the whistle against the Democrat, you face retaliation. That's wrong. But the whole fraud scheme is wrong. And we want to bring those state employees in. We want to talk to them. We want to see all the correspondence that was had between the state agencies and the governor and the attorney general to see why they did not do anything at that particular moment. Such a disregard for taxpayer dollars is criminal in itself. But to do it for political gain, that's even worse. Hopefully, we can set an example and hold people accountable for this type of negligent abuse of tax dollars, because I think this is not just a Minnesota thing. I think you're going to see this in other blue states that all they talk about, these Democrat governors, is more and more social programs, more and more SNAP benefits, more and more Medicaid, but yet they refuse to admit that there's any level of fraud. So hopefully this is the tip of the iceberg, and I think this investigation could lead to many more investigations in other states and hopefully finally some savings of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, you would think, you know, if they're doing it in Minnesota, that's not the only place where it's happening. For his part, here's what Governor Walz said, defending his actions or lack thereof. Listen here.
My message is simple on this. You commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to prison. I don't care what color you are, what religion you are. Anybody who wants to help us in that, we welcome that. But sitting on the sidelines and throwing out accusations, and let's be very clear, demonizing an entire population and lying to people about the safety and security of this state is beneath that.
Just got a few seconds left, Mr. Chairman. Your response to that? I mean, this is happening right under his nose.
He's trying to play the race card here. He's trying to play the discrimination card. No, the problem is Tim Walz. The problem is he was warned of this massive amount of fraud, and yet he turned a blind eye for political reasons. That's why he turned a blind eye. So we want to stop this from happening, obviously, but we want to find and hold people accountable for allowing this to happen and see if this is being replicated in other states.
All right. Well, we look forward to the results of your investigation. Thank you for spending time with us today, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. It's a story that's not going away, should not go away. President Trump is calling out Minnesota and their Somali community as ICE is zeroing in on the Twin Cities.
They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain, and from where they came from, they got nothing. But when they come from hell, and they complain and do nothing but, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
You know, I'm sure there are very honorable, law-abiding, upstanding citizens and contributors from the Somali community here in the United States. But that doesn't mean we can't use our judgment, our wisdom, in analyzing the various contributions of communities and cultures. We're not going to pretend here that all cultures are of equal value or are the same. No one really believes that. No one makes individual choices on a day-to-day basis that reveals they think all cultures are the same, where they choose to live, what they choose to eat, who they choose to socialize with. It's mostly a virtue signal, and that's what you get from most politicians when it comes to this very serious conversation that needs to be had about our culture here in America. You normally get from politicians just pandering, just nonsense, just stuff like this from Minnesota's mayor.
That's not American. That's not what we are about. And we're going to do right by every single person in our cities. And so, to our Somali community, Daman Shabka, Somaliyed Kunul, Minnesota, Garahan, Minneapolis, Waan, Kuji Janila Hai, Waan, Ku Gereb Taganahan.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. I would be curious, I don't know Somali, if that's a little bit like Jill Biden saying she likes tacos. I don't know, because it's in Somali. I speak English because I live in America. And that's the point. This is a country with a culture, and we have a right to ask whether or not all cultures are compatible with the culture of America. And the current fraud scandal in Minnesota is a real big red flag. That is if you believe the data and the investigation and the fraud. And of course, some will telling you, don't believe it. Don't believe your lying eyes. And you can guess who that might be. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
State employees in Minnesota are saying they're worried about his handling of fraud and that he's to blame for the amount of fraud during COVID, about $1 billion.
And you really believe that?
Well, that's the latest figures that have been released.
You believe state employees are actually saying something?
Some DHS employees, yes, in Minnesota.
I won't believe everything I read online.
How about this, Congresswoman? Can we believe our ears? Because it appears that State's Attorney General Keith Ellison is also tied to the $200 million fraud that was Feeding Our Future. This is leaked audio from 2021.
Just getting the question, just getting the inquiry from the AG is sometimes enough to make people knock it off.
And the people on the other end of that conversation, they appear to be offering Ellison something in return.
And we are willing to put our money where our mouths are in that sense, helping elected officials that are interested in protecting communities of color specifically.
Now, Somalia is ranked among the most corrupt countries in the world. It has a score of 9 out of 100, 0 being the most corrupt. And the number of Somali immigrants in the U.S. is rising from a population of 2,500 in the 90s to 145,000 in 2015, a decade ago. Who knows what the number is today, but temporary protected status for Somalis has been extended 27 times. So where are the Somalis living in the United States? Well, here are your top 3 states: Minnesota, Ohio, and Washington. Number 10, you can see on that list, is Maine. And one of our viewers brought this to our attention. Kudzu Moose writes in Maine, there is a large Somali community near the Lewiston area. That's sort of a rough area with a lot of drugs. I'm not saying that they are involved in that, but Lewiston has a reputation. Maybe some of your Maine people can give you more information. Let's do that. Let's seek more information. Joining me now is Editor-in-Chief of the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson. Steve, it's great to have you on the program. I know that you've done a lot of reporting on this. Is it true? What's going on in Maine?
Well, it's absolutely true, Will, that there's a corrupt nexus between the Somali diaspora that began arriving in Maine about 25 years ago and the Democratic Party. They've created NGOs, they've created Maine care agencies, Medicaid agencies, and money flows through policies that are passed and supported by Democratic politicians into these groups. These groups then turn around and do get out the vote efforts in migrant communities, registering so-called new Mainers to vote for Democrats. It's important for viewers to understand that it's not just a group, a foreign culture coming and taking advantage of the welfare system. There's certainly some of that happening, but there's a political class that's enabling this because they can use the migrant populations, the diaspora, which they don't really care about, to enhance their own wealth and their own power. Here in Maine, we have multiple Somali American refugees who are in our state legislature. The only individual who is in the Office of New Americans right now is a Sudanese refugee. And all of them have ties to the administration of Governor Janet Mills, who is currently running for Senate. All of these NGOs get no-bid contracts. They get preferential treatment. They're highly politically connected. And they're a diaspora of really somewhere between 10,000 to 20,000 in the Lewiston-Auburn area. No one really knows exactly how many of them there are, Will.
Yeah, and I want to be clear about something. This isn't to besmirch every single member of the Somali community. That is not what this conversation is about. The conversation is about whether or not there is a corruption problem at disproportionate numbers within that community, affecting the public services and the coffers and the tax-paying Americans in various states across the country. And that seems to me a very worthy enterprise, not just of journalism, but of any politician, to figure out if you're defrauding Americans to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And the conversation's bigger, as you point out. It's also about the political class, like Jacob Frey, like Keith Ellison on a very suspect call, like Tim Walz, or maybe like the politicians in Maine.
I think you're absolutely right to talk about individuals. And if you want to talk about individuals, we have Abdullahi Ali, who's the CEO of Gateway Community Services in Maine. Under the LePage administration, Gateway was audited and found to have overbilled Medicaid by more than $700,000. It's money they still haven't paid back. And at the same time, in 2024, he was in Somalia running for president of Jubaland, the semi-autonomous southern state of Somalia, bragging in Kenyan media about buying arms and paying militiamen to support his bid for the presidency of Jubaland. At the same time, he's being celebrated in the main media. Today, we had Ayman Osman in Lewiston, a city councilor for Ward 5. He was just indicted on 2 Class B charges by a grand jury for possessing stolen goods and theft. He doesn't even live in the ward where he's claiming to be the city councilor for. His brother, Rilwan Osman, runs a Medicaid NGO that has overbilled Maine Care for $2.5 million in the past. So we can talk about individuals all day long, Will.
Right, and this cannot be waved away. It's been tried to and successfully been waved away as, oh, this conversation is xenophobic. Oh, this conversation is racist. That was done in Minnesota to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's only what we know of so far. By the way, that's what was done in the UK that allowed little girls to be raped in rings in towns across the UK for years, and we're simply not going to allow that to happen in America. Steve, thanks for keeping us up to date. As our viewer, Kudzu Moose, asked about what's happening in Maine. Thank you, Steve.
Now, let's say you have 2 families in any neighborhood, one headed by a father who is gainfully employed, paying his taxes, raising his kids right, and another family is headed by a dad who's making huge money through fraud schemes, buying expensive cars, taking his kids on lavish trips, knowing all along he's protected by powerful politicians. Now, which family do you think will soon become the example for all to follow? Well, this scenario is actually playing out right now in Minnesota, where too many have concluded that crime does indeed pay, at least in the Somali community. For years, this politically powerful group, a staggering 80,000 strong, has had liberals like Governor Tim Walz and Twin Cities mayors in their back pockets. And now they've concluded, yeah, they're above the law.
Walz he should be ashamed. That beautiful land, that beautiful state, it's a hellhole right now. And the Somalians should be out of here. They've destroyed our country. And all they do is complain, complain, complain.
Well, thanks to the City Journal, Americans and President Trump were made aware of a decade-long string of Somali fraud schemes that ended up stealing billions of taxpayer dollars by exploiting Minnesota's very generous welfare state, where the culprits here inoculated themselves from scrutiny by crying discrimination at every turn. You know how it goes. Well, it took long enough, but prosecutors finally started bringing the culprits down.
We've got 78 people that have been arrested pursuant to our investigation along with the interagency, and that investigation is very much ongoing. We are not finished. It was one of the largest fraud scams ever committed in the state of Minnesota history, and we are going to continue to interview and subpoena anyone involved with this case.
And now the state is getting a thorough review also by the Treasury Department, which announced it was launching its own investigation, including the claims that millions of the taxpayers' dollars were funneled to that Islamic terror group, al-Shabaab. And on top of that, House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer just announced his own investigation. Now, this is all long overdue, but naturally, Democrats like Mayor Jacob Frey ignore the opportunity to clean up the crime and instead attack Trump and then pander to the Somalis.
We need to also be demanding better from an administration who is intent on targeting people and committing so much time, energy, and money to terrorizing certain groups within our community. That's not American. To our Somali community. Daman Shabka, Somaliyed Kunul, Minnesota, Garahan, Minneapolis.
How embarrassing. And by the way, so much for the melting pot. But it's not just the left that's responsible here. So are the media. they were complicit in their aggressive lack of curiosity on what's been happening. Undoubtedly, they're afraid of damaging their everyone's welcome here narrative on the third world refugees. But this week, the New York Times was finally shamed into running this piece: how fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. Now, it quoted a professor, Ahmed Samatar, who's described as a leading expert in Somali studies. And he noted that Somali refugees who came here after that country's civil war were raised in a culture where stealing from a dysfunctional and corrupt government was widespread.
I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks. We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage.
Well, I'm not wild about the garbage comment. Remember when Biden called Trump's constituents garbage? We weren't too happy about that. But look, the blowback from the local politicians against the administration, I mean, the fraud was rampant, but their blowback against Trump, well, that's predictable here.
No human being is garbage. And that kind of language is dangerous. It's dangerous. It puts people's lives in danger.
Of course, he has his own history, but a danger? Trump's putting people in danger? Now, in the span of 3 decades, Minneapolis went from being a safe, homogeneous, sleepy city to a Somali gangland where criminality is regularly contextualized, such as with a recent case of the rape of a 12-year-old girl by a Somali immigrant. Now, before he was sentenced, his local Islamic center wrote him a community support letter. Isn't that lovely? And Trump's favorite congresswoman, who famously downplayed concerns about al-Qaeda, insists the negative picture painted of Somalis is all wrong.
We are the most generous people. We are one of the most friendliest communities. It is why we made Minnesota home, because it fits with our character. Minnesota nice is not just something we say, it's something that is true. And Somalis are as nice as Minnesota is. We are, like I said, very resilient. We're very hardworking, and we are very patriotic.
Okay, well, if that's true, then the community should have no problem following and respecting American customs, because patriotism requires respect for American law, even when it means that some in your community are sent to prison or sent packing. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.